Hey, welcome back to the SOMM TV podcast. My name is Jason Wise. On today's podcast, I'm not sure if this is a good idea, but I'm going to sit down and talk with our very own Shakera Jones, who is the host of Weekly Wine and a podcast on this network called A Glass for Every Palate. Shakera is not somebody you want to get into an argument with, but I'm going to do just that. We're going to talk about a grape I don't want to say she doesn't like, but is a polarizing grape for many of you, which is called Viognier. It's a grape I happen to really like. I'm going to attempt to defend this grape in the face of a very, very worthy adversary here. I'm going to get myself in trouble, as per usual, and I'm sure we all have these grapes and we all have these wines that we love, and we have to tell others that they should love them. Viognier is kind of one of those for me. Anyways, we're going to get into that. In the meantime, did you know that SOMM TV has several movies you love about food and wine you can watch right now? Blood into Wine with Maynard from Tool, Bottle Shock. I don't know if you've seen Chris Pine's wig and haircut in that. It's worth the price of admission alone. The story of the Judgment of Paris, whether it's true or not in that movie. How about A Chef's Voyage? The story of the head chef at Manresa. This is a really, really good film showing him going through the world in France, dealing with everything, a 3-star Michelin restaurant. There's an incredible film called Agave, Spirit of a Nation, that gets into that incredible beverage. There's lots of stuff on SOMM TV many of you may not have known we even have, and I want you to dive deep. It's basically the weekend, so here are your movies. Let's pour ourselves a glass of wine and watch something on SOMM TV. Without further ado, here we go, Shakera. You know, they say there's 2 rules in life. Never get involved in a land war in Asia, and never try to fight Shakera Jones. Here I am, breaking that law right now. How are you, my love?
I am wonderful. I miss talking on podcasts. I'm happy to be back here.
I can't wait for season 3 of
Season
Glass
3
for Every
is
Palate.
loading, man. I'm excited and I'm ready. But this is one this has kind of been in the making. There's been like a lead up to this one, hasn't there?
That's true. On an earlier podcast, for those of you who aren't diehard listeners of this pod like my mother is, I would say we had a out of nowhere spirited discussion about Viognier, the grape. Mm-hmm. Okay, this is like, you think about all the world's problems and we're having an argument about Viognier. I think it goes to show that, we have clean drinking water here.
First world problem.
We had a spirited discussion on a podcast that kind of came up out of nowhere, you, Jill Zamorsky, and I. And it came out that you two, and especially you, are not enormous fans of the grape Viognier. And we're going to get into probably what the use of that grape is, the history of it, where it's from, but also your wrong opinion about it. We'll get into that too. And
it's so rare that I have a wrong opinion, but okay, fair.
I believe you on this one. Fair. I believe you very strongly. All right. Why is Viognier so divisive? I wonder if listeners, I bet some people take it or leave it. Some people are passionate one way or direction. I wonder if there's anyone listening who's not had it. So maybe you could just start with Viognier. What is it at its core?
So I think that, I think a lot of people haven't had it. And I think that more so than other grape varietals, I think there are a lot of bad examples of Viognier out there. And if you happen to have one of those, it's really hard for you to even want to give the grape a chance again. But in its best form, right? We're talking Rhone. It is a spectacular wine when made well. The grape brings body and richness and a very punctual acidity at times. It's not a bad grape. There's just so many bad examples of it. And the good examples are either hard to get or very expensive. Right. And if I'm going to spend that much money on a bottle of white wine, there are too many other things that I can drink before that. It's also a great blending grape, where when people have it in blends, the thing that they can't identify that they like about the blend is normally Viognier. It brings beautiful texture to blends. On its own, though, I think it tastes like rubbing alcohol mixed with olive oil most times. And so I just, when you put it in categories with other grapes that should go, it always goes first for me. But I think when it's used well, when it's made well, when the winemakers understand the grape and what it needs, I think it can be done very, very well. I just think you have to spend more money than you should to enjoy
That's fair.
that.
Okay, so I get what you're saying. You're not saying it's all bad. You're saying to make it good is often not worth it when you could do something else.
Correct.
From a buyer standpoint.
Correct.
Okay, so then in that case, I do want to offer a counterpoint here, but in that case, why would winemakers do this grape at all? What's the point? I mean, it's hard to sell, it's hard to market. For the small contingency who like rubbing alcohol with olive oil notes on their wine, you're a winemaker and you are there are tons of places that they make. This is another really interesting thing because of all the grapes, I want to take one step back and say there is this place, many of you know this, so I know that I'm speaking to the choir here, called Condrieu. It is in the Northern Rhone. It is a beautiful place that butts up against the river. It's got some hills. We actually on SOMM TV have a closer look at it with Yves Couilleron. You can take a look at.
Make you watch.
Yeah, it is definitely one of these, like, why did that grape, which at one point I have read could have pretty much been extinct because that was the only place in the world, in this tiny little place. Why did it spread all over the place? They grow it in Australia. They grow it in Oregon. They grow it in Sonoma. They grow it in South America. Why? Why did that one get out and not so many other grapes? Why are they not growing,
Well, I think that if you've had it from there, it's really good, right? And so I can understand, particularly with winemakers in other parts of the world, why if you have it from there, you go, shit, this is good. Can I do this? My terroir is very similar climate, similar elevation, similar proximity to water, similar sun exposure. I think I can do this too. So I think that it's just pure creativity and exploration that took it other places. I think it takes time to get it to where you want it to be. I think it takes an experienced winemaker to really, really do what needs to be done, to be patient, to know when to pick, to know a lot of things to make that grape. I think that those wines are phenomenal. So I do understand if you've ever had those, you want to take them somewhere. But it's like, think about restaurants. Everyone can't cook chicken. Chicken's everywhere.
Yeah, that's fair.
Not every restaurant can make chicken. Not every restaurant can cook eggs. Now, if you have perfectly cooked eggs, there's nothing better in the world. A perfectly juicy, well-roasted piece of chicken, nothing better. Simple and delicious. But if you mess it up, it's disgusting and you never want to eat it again.
I think not from a taste standpoint or a preference standpoint. I want to compare this to a grape that often gets a lot of credit for being finicky and difficult to grow, but yet you see frigging everywhere, which is Pinot.
Yeah.
Which grape do you think is harder to do a good representation of in reality, Pinot or Viognier?
Viognier is much harder.
Okay.
Much harder because I think that inherently people like Pinot Noir. It's not new to them. It's a grape that they've heard of. They've had really good examples of it. And even bad Pinot Noir, if it's made properly, we're not talking about bulk or any of that crap. It's not the worst thing ever. It can lack depth. It can lack complexity if it's just poorly done, but it doesn't really taste bad. Viognier, it's not just the taste. It has a very distinct texture.
It's viscous, right? Is that what you'd say?
Exactly. That's why I say olive oil. It's thick. So if that's not done well, that's a much harder thing to cover. The truth is bad Pinot Noir, oak can fix it. You can do a lot more to mask your errors in making Pinot Noir.
Sure.
I have seen errors in neon lights when I've had bad examples of Viognier.
Yeah, you're not wrong here.
Oh,
but I also
start with that?
No, come on, look. You're not wrong there. But I do think there's an element, and I think winemakers are creatures of long-term habit. They are trying to master a place, master a grape, but I also feel like most winemakers want to push the challenge further every time. And so I personally believe it's not like they can, when you have a plot and you get to replant something or you get to change and do something, Viognier is an easy sell because like you said, it is a tremendous blending grape. They blend it, we should mention Côte Rôtie. Co-fermenting it with Syrah is magic. Yeah. And people like Pax Mall and Sonoma, he does crazy stuff like a 50-50 blend.
Those
and
wines
some
are
that's
so
lower.
Freaking good. Oh man.
They're incredible. And there's a strange thing with Côte Rôtie in that they blend Viognier with it. It gives a floral lift, but it also makes it redder, which makes very little sense. Chemistry-wise, it does make sense, but the way that adding a white wine actually makes the red wine deeper in color. So there's a lot of elements that go to it, but I also feel like it sounds like a tangent, but it's not. I keep tropical fish. It's come up on this podcast many times. I keep exotic fish and I love it. I would But there is this element. I love these fish called discus fish, and they're very expensive, and they're like dating supermodels. They're just always finicky, and they're beautiful, and they're sometimes mean to you, and they just. And I think that Viognier is like that. I think that Viognier is this, and I don't mean it's a supermodel in the way that it's always beautiful to everybody, and supermodels certainly aren't to people, but I think that it is this kind of like deep challenge for a winemaker to get right, even more so than something like Riesling or Chenin, which I think like those are two grapes that are incredibly difficult to really get right. I think making white wine is harder.
It's harder than making red wine, for sure.
Yeah.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, I don't have tropical fish.
I say that as a drinker. I'm not a winemaker, and I don't proclaim to be one, obviously.
But we probably know a lot more. We've had these conversations with people that make wine, and it is a challenge. I'm not a tropical fish keeper, but I'm a plant keeper, and I agree with you. So I have a plant called a string of pearls, where literally people normally kill it within the first month of having it. It's particular. It doesn't like a lot of anything. It also needs everything when it needs it. It's quite finicky, but it's beautiful, and it's lush, and it grows. So I think as much as I rag on this grape, I love that winemakers keep trying with it because, when we look at it globally, we're looking at global warming, we're looking at grapes growing in places where they should never grow, and grapes that have always flourished in places, the amount of it just shrinking. So I think that it's very important that winemakers continue to do things like this with Viognier. Now, I love Semillon. A lot of people hate Semillon, but I love it. I think it's just a little less viscous than Viognier is, and that's why I enjoy it. For the same
Interesting.
reasons.
I am not an enormous Semillon fan, though.
What?
I do. Well, it's not that I don't see it oftentimes. It's not common to find it bottled on its own.
Yeah.
It's often, look, if you're going to have Sauternes or you're going to have a white Bordeaux, or there's a ton of Semillon planted in Australia that they often blend with Sauvignon Blanc or Chard or whatever.
There's some plants right in California, Monte Rosso.
There you go.
They make a Sauvignon Semillon blend that is phenomenal.
Yeah, I believe that. I think too, well, diverging from Viognier, I think Sauvignon Blanc is very acidic. It's got this astringent quality that I think goes really well with a bigger, fatter wine like a Semillon. So to me, it sounds like an odd blend, but it's big in Australia and many other places, Bordeaux. But so anywho, when it comes to Viognier
is also not that food friendly though.
I knew we were going to go here.
I think
so.
We're going there.
It's very floral. That's the other thing. And I think the floral aspect of wine can be misinterpreted as sweet by people.
Yes.
Now, unfortunately, some Viogniers are picked way too late. Oftentimes they are very high alcohol. And I'm not talking about like a good winemaker had their hands on this. I'm talking about just we're making Viognier.
Yeah.
And I don't mean to call out names or anything, but oftentimes they're 15 plus alcohol. So you find yourself getting loopy off of a glass and a half at a dinner, and you're right. Now, I do think in the right hands. Now, there is one producer in the United States that I think has mastered Viognier. I think it is probably the best I've ever had in the New World.
Ooh.
It's Porter Creek.
Okay.
Alex, the winemaker there. This is in Sonoma. We actually filmed there for some reenactment B-roll stuff for SOMM 2. And Alex, who's the winemaker, has no idea I'm talking about this or mentioning it. But I will tell you, if you want to taste a wine, it's not incredibly low in alcohol. I think it's around like 14, but Viognier is often hot.
Yes.
It is often hot. Even in the motherland.
Yeah.
You'll find Condrus that are relatively hot. You'll find some that are 13 and a half, but for the most part, they can be hotter. Yeah. They are, much like your plant, they are very finicky, and they need, you got to pick at the perfect time. Mm-hmm. But I would say I like this in a lot of ways stylistically because it actually has acid, not in the way that acid would happen in, I don't know, a Chablis or something. It's not that kind of acid.
No.
But it has acid for a Viognier. And without acid, you and I both know that to be food friendly without acid is very tricky.
It's hard. What are you eating then?
No tannin, no acid. And it's like, without those two things.
I'm drinking butter. I'm drinking oil.
You're drinking
olive oil. There is an Israeli producer, Sagat, P-S-A-G-O-T, something like that. And I had it on a tasting with, that was maybe last summer on an Israeli wine tasting. And there was a bunch of people that I know. And so they were all waiting to see my reaction of trying this Viognier. It's freaking delicious because it has acid.
Right.
And a little bit of acid in a wine that is so weighty and viscous goes a very, very, very long way. And that is always my complaint. A wine that has no tannin, no acid, and a tremendous amount of alcohol. What are you actually doing with this? When and why are you breaking this out? What is it going with?
All right, so let's talk about food in Viognier, because obviously if you're in the Northern Rhone, the Northern Rhone cooks with butter. The Southern Rhone cooks with olive oil. This is not across the board, but pretty much.
Right.
I do think Viognier works really well with, if you're going to have like a charcuterie plate or something like that, where you have like a lot of salt,
Yep.
You've got some fat in the meat. Look, is it maybe something you could argue that, hey, have a champagne instead? Maybe. But at the same time, if you're going to have Viognier, I think that kind of thing works. And you see that quite a bit. Sweetbreads, things that are a little off the beaten path.
Things that are
rich.
really not American.
Yeah, that's fair.
And that's the thing. I mean, it does. You can break it out with charcuterie. And that's
I'm losing this argument.
I was going to let you go with me being wrong about but I don't, and I think that
you're a long game player.
I am.
Like
I am a very good chess player too. I think that
I don't doubt it.
That's what we've been trying to do with getting people into knowing and understanding wine, right? Is like, listen, if you have it with what you're already eating, you just did a great segment on sparkling wines with Cheez-Its, popcorn, all the things that people already eat. You and I are both good at getting people to try wines, but if we lead in with, so this goes really well with charcuterie and sweetbreads, everyone looks at us crazy. Now, you and I would eat that, and I don't disagree with either one of those things. I think Viognier is unique in that charcuterie is perfect. It's salty. If you're doing cheeses, there's some creaminess there that kind of doesn't overpower the weight of it. Then you have beautiful salinity and sometimes almost sweetness in the meats. And charcuterie, that works. And things like sweetbreads and other offals, right? And then everything else that you would ever tell somebody to eat with wine, they won't drink Viognier. So then you get into, well, just go in the wine shop and explore.
Do you have to eat? Do you have
to eat? No.
Do you have to eat with wine? I mean, can't wine just be, let's sit down on the couch and let's talk about the last episode of Yellowstone or something and drink a glass of wine?
It can be, but then we kind of contradict the argument that we all make already, right? In that when you look at the culture of Europe and a lot of, I don't love the words old world, new world, but we'll say it because we're talking in the context of wine. So when we look at the old world, right, food and wine are not separated. Right? You have cocktails and spirits and things that you drink, but meals and wine go together. Mm-hmm. And one of the challenges we face in America is getting people to first see wine as it's not for you to get shit-faced on, right? Now, you can drink some Viogniers and 3 glasses in, good luck. I mean, I wouldn't drive anywhere. But if the point that we're trying to get across is, look, there are high alcohol wines, but wine isn't meant for you to just like chug back. And this is ironic that we're having this conversation because we are of people that just sit and talk and drink wine, yes. A lot of it. But that's not really what people are doing. So if you told people now to drink Viognier just to try it, right? Like that's my whole show is about sometimes you just got to go in and try stuff, right? You've named a producer. I've named a producer. We both live in places where we have access to a lot of wines. So to the people that don't, that are going to go into the average place that they buy wine, what would you say the percentage is that if they just randomly decided today's the day I listen to this podcast, I am going to try Viognier? What's the percentage you think outside of a major market, somebody actually gets access to a good bottle of Viognier at a reasonable price point? And by reasonable, I'm going to be generous. I'm going to say under $30.
And I want to have something witty to respond with you here, but you're right. It would not be easy. It would be really hard. They would have access to Viognier, though.
Oh,
that's
sure.
unfortunate.
But I said
they would have
good
access.
One that isn't going to make them never want to try this again. I think there's been some great examples from Virginia, which is awesome. But that's my point.
There have been.
Yeah.
Stone Tower Winery makes a nice one. There are plenty of nice ones. And
I think they're doing good. But outside of a major wine market or somewhere oddly specific in the United States, like Virginia, like this one place that's doing this one really difficult grape really well, The chances are, if everyone that listens to this episode went to the local place where they buy wine, which for the majority of the country isn't a wine shop with a highly curated list, the majority of the country buys wine in places where they can get it, no problem. But how often will they actually pull a good bottle of this if they try it? They won't.
They won't. I want to ask you something. Do you think it's okay to come on my podcast and prove? Do you think this is okay to come on and just make me look like this?
I accepted a challenge. A challenge was issued to me on my slander of this grape. And I understand why people think I'm just mean to this grape. I'm not. I'm just saying that it's difficult to get good examples of it. It's difficult or it's expensive. So before I tell you to go over $75, if budget isn't a problem, well, shit, I can list you a whole bunch of them. There's great producers, where it's amazing, but you got to spend some money on it. So if that's the case, there's a million other grapes that I could tell you to try that will actually go with your food if you're not inclined to cook sweetbreads. And that you'll enjoy a lot more.
I should never said sweetbreads.
Oh, but it is one of the perfect pairings for it, right? And I guess we should talk about sweetbreads. They're first of all, it's what is it?
Don't tell people what it is. Don't tell people what it is.
It's a gland of a small animal. It's a gland of an animal.
Yeah, it is.
You probably want to try it.
I love it. I
enjoy it very much. If you have it properly cooked, you get a nice crispy sweetbread. It's delicious. But you need to have it somewhere. It's probably going to be either a really good like French bistro or just a really high-end restaurant that knows what they're doing with it, because it has to be cleaned properly. It has to be prepared properly. Otherwise, it tastes like exactly what it is. But if you have that, that's a good opportunity in a good restaurant to challenge yourself to order something you'd never order. Then you order a bottle of Viognier in a restaurant, and it'll likely blow your mind. But you're not picking that up this weekend.
Condrieu is a small place, so they don't make a ton of wine. The wines expensive is the wrong term, because it's like they just don't make a lot of it. I mean, in our interview with Yves Couilleron, who does the Closer Look, he basically says like, this is a passion. It's a passion for our people. It's our history. We make it, but it's not for the money. You don't make Condrieu for the money. And so I think that when you see a good bottle of Condrieu, you're going to see it for $50 to $80.
Definitely.
Because they just don't. And there is a misconception. One thing I will rail against is that it's not ageable, because a lot of people say it's not, and it can age. I'm serious.
I've not had it aged.
I have had some very, very good 15 or so year old, 20-year-old.
What does it evolve to with low acid?
Well, it depends on who made it. I mean, for the most part, it turns into, it gets richer, which of course you're probably going to go, I'm out. But it gets richer. It gets, but it mellows and it blends. Whereas I do think one of the problems with Viognier, even good Viognier, is that it inherently feels unbalanced. You have this floral aspect. You've got kind of it's like 4 or 5 blocks that don't fit together, but they're in the same glass.
Yeah.
And so I think Viognier has this weird quality that what is it? Is it sweet? Even though it's not, people think it is because they're getting the floral thing. Yeah. It's got a texture aspect. And I will say, when you get one that is aged, even just 4 or 5 years, you get this homogeny that it kind of comes together and it feels more whole. And that's what wine aging does, for every wine. But I think for Viognier, it's like you have to kind of try this with an age on it to understand is this a wine that I would go 30 years? No, probably not.
Right.
Is it a wine that I'd love to try a good producer stored properly 30 years old? You bet your ass.
I'm signing up for that. And, listen, I encourage people to try it. Every week, somebody sends me a message, you have to try this one. And my question is always, why? What's different about it? Right? Because if you tell me something like, it has a remarkable amount of acid, really? Where is that grown? Because then I'm going to know, based on where the hell in the world it's growing, it's only going to have so much acid if it's not being grown somewhere that's a little cooler, right? Warm climate, I don't even shudder to think about what the hell that tastes like. I never want to have that. So it
would be very alcoholic.
You know what I mean? And those are not the styles of wine that I want to drink that have a lot of alcohol. If I want to drink, and I think people, and this is where Viognier also falls into the people that want to drink wine, there are people that ask, like, listen, if I want to drink a wine that will give me a buzz, what should I drink? I'm always going to say, go to the Australia section of your wine shop and get something from the Barossa Valley and drink
They deserve better.
Oh, but they're good wines. They're just normally really up there in alcohol.
Yeah, they are. Especially the ones we see. Especially the ones we see here.
And they're still very, very good. Like I love, Jane and her husband that are importing more Australian wines now. I love those wines. I think they're delicious.
Jane Lopes. Yeah.
So I think if you really do want to just drink wine to get a buzz, you should drink Viognier because it's going to be really high in alcohol if that's what you want to do. But I don't think that's kind of the message or the lesson that we're trying to get people that want to start enjoying and experiencing wine. I think that's the opposite of what we want to tell them.
Okay, so here's where I would say you start with Viognier. And I know this is going to sound like, oh, well, everybody would love to drink Côte Rôtie if they can. Well, you can actually get good Côte Rôties for the $50 to $60 mark. You really can. I promise you it's possible. Now, is it you live in Middle America and your corner store? No. Is it on some mail order thing? Yes. You can probably order it to your house.
Yes.
Here's the thing. When you try, I really strongly recommend you do this with 2 French Syrahs. You probably do like Saint Joseph, which can be found very affordable and very good. It's pure Syrah. Find a decent one. Yeah, there you go. And then find that's a good one.
That's a really good one.
And then find, a Côte Rôtie. And the difference between those two, now there is a very small percentage of Côte Rôtie producers who do not use Viognier. It's very rare, though, I will be honest. And so the difference between those two, aside from the fact that climate is very different, it's different soil, totally different from just being a few, miles as the crow flies down a river. But I would also say the other big difference, that lift, is Viognier. And part of the thing that got me to truly respect that grape is to understand what it did to Côte Rôtie. And then after that, having Condrieu and tasting that and then isolating what that tasted like mixed with Syrah, and then, an appreciation grew for it on its own.
Okay.
Now, I've also been there. I've met a lot of winemakers there. I have heard their passionate stories, and I'm not going to lie to you. It's one thing to be like, hey, I like the Irish. It's another thing to go hear them sing Irish songs. And then you're like, man, I love the Irish.
Right.
So that's what it's like going to Condrieu, and you hear them pontificate on this historical ancient grape, which truly is ancient.
Yep.
And I don't know. I mean, I guess what I'm trying to say is give us a chance. I mean, a glass for every palate. Isn't this your thing?
Sure. How much are you willing to pay for that glass? That's all I'm saying. There is there are Viogniers that I have said I don't hate all of it. There are great examples of it. But if you tell me, listen, Shakera, I want to get, what you just described is for someone that goes, I want to try, you wine people, gush over these wines. I want you to recommend a bottle for me that I will never forget. It will be etched in my mind. And I'm willing to spend
Boone's Green Apple. You'll never forget it.
You will never forget that. I'm willing to spend up to $100, but I want to taste something different. I want to taste something that my palate hasn't been then do that. Because otherwise, even if someone starts with what you just said, where are they replicating that? Where are they getting that experience again at a much lower price point? It's impossible.
It's impossible, but remember, experience is part of wine. And not every wine is supposed to be drank on a Tuesday night. Some wines are supposed to be drank to... Look, I also feel like it's okay for a wine to be open to talk about the wine. You and I do it all the time.
Yes.
And many people listening to this are used to hey, we sit at a table, we open up a bunch of wines, and we're literally opening them to talk about wine.
Correct.
I think Viognier deserves that. Here's a counterpoint on another floral wine. I do not particularly love Tarantas.
I was about to say, if you say that wretched grape that smells like a funeral home, I like Viognier more than Tarantas.
I will also say, hold on. There was a blind tasting session with Andres Rosenberg, who's a sommelier, and we filmed it in Buenos Aires.
Mm-hmm.
He pulled out a Tarantas from the 70s, I think it was. And it was incredible. Shakera, I've never had anything like this in my life. It was on my list of best wines of the year.
Okay.
It was an incredible thing, and you can see it in that episode. My whole life has been spent thinking Tarantas is basically the the potpourri that's been in my grandmother's bathroom for 41 and a half years, and it has spider webs in it. And every time I go in there, it always smells the same.
Yep.
And I think because my grandmother has lost her sense of smell, she doesn't notice.
Yep.
Now, I will say, I had this and I felt like, holy shit, I didn't realize what Torrontés could be. Now, it was made by a master winemaker.
And it was 30 years old.
It was 30 years old. It had tremendous acid still. I couldn't believe it. I mean, it was one of these wacky wines. And so I will also say that, like, those discoveries are out there. And by the way, I am really sorry for people listening in Argentina. And I know that you guys love your Torrontés down there. And I'm not trying to pull that grape out and shit on it. I'm just trying to say it's often that's sometimes an $8 bottle of wine.
It's
not hard to find.
But it's also an easier wine with food that if you can get past the smell of it. And I think that
it's very floral. It's not like it smells extremely floral. It hits you over the head.
It smells like air freshener. Like, it's too much. But I also think that I will give a little asterisk next to it because I really do want to go to Argentina really soon. So let me not get myself put on a blacklist. I also think that our noses, when you drink and taste like us, our noses are much more sensitive to certain things. Yeah. So I don't think those wines taste bad. I'm just so off-put by the second I put the glass near my mouth. The smell of it is just like, ugh. It's like walking into a department store on the first floor and getting assaulted by everyone trying to spray you with something. It's overwhelming. But as far as taste, I think that wine is inherently more balanced than Viognier is.
Oh my God. You're not wrong, but it also is simpler, I think, than Viognier.
I want everyone to donate $1 to their favorite charity every time Jason has said you're not wrong in this podcast, because he started off.
Tune in next week when I get my ass handed to me by someone else. When it comes to this, though, all right, let's just, I know, because we're over time here, but let's just talk about floral grapes. So if you're going to talk about the major grapes that have a really floral component,
Torrontés.
What would you name off the top? Torrontés for sure. Viognier, I would say, is definitely in that category.
Ironically, Sauvignon Blanc, depending on where you have it from, can be quite floral on the nose.
Can also
Pinot
smell
Noir,
like a cat box, but...
Pinot Noir is quite floral to me.
Yeah, I agree.
Gamay is extremely floral to me. But
in a different way. In a different way.
I think if we're talking about potpourri floral, I'll stop there. I think that those are the more floral ones. And then you get into things like Cab Franc that's more pyrazines than anything else. But, if we say floral just as pronounced on the nose, it's why we don't drink Pinot Grigio, right? Sorry, Italy. That wine is completely flat to me. It has no nose. It barely has a palate.
So that's the other side. The Pinot Grigio is here is acid and not much more. I mean, but I don't think Pinot, first of all, there are some really, I think Terlan in Alto Adige does, I think some of the best work with Pinot Grigio, often they blend it with a number of grapes.
It needs it.
I think that is one of the great wine houses of the world.
Mm-hmm.
But you're right in saying that why is Pinot Grigio so loved by the stereotype would be housewives or something like that, I guess. Why is it so loved? Because it's easy. It's easy to drink.
But it's nothing. Easy. You're actually better off drinking water or a cocktail.
Do you know how many people drink Miller Ultra Light, Shakera? I mean,
we reset.
Do you know how many people drink that? What's that?
We reset with it. Miller is what we reset.
Miller High Life tastes like nothing.
Nothing, but it's a great reset when you've been drinking excessively. It's a wonderful way to reset your palate. I think that's it, right? I think that a lot of these grapes that we've had, by the way, when you posted that thing, everyone that said Gamay can go, you were 100% wrong. Gamay cannot go. Get into this. Period.
We posted something on social media where it was delete a grape for good. Okay, first of all, on this pod, I have railed against Beaujolais Nouveau, and I think Beaujolais Nouveau, which I hate, I want it to go away. I will stand by this till the day I die. Go away forever. Never, that could be another pod if you're actually going to stand here and try to defend.
I'm not going to defend that.
Okay, I needed to go because Gamay is one of the world's great treasures, and you're ruining it with this awful whatever. But I do think that was a social media gimmick, to be one of these has to go. I mean, what was on? It was Pinot and
Petit Verdot. A lot of people said Petit Verdot, but I just think much like Viognier, a lot of people have never had that grape.
I agree with you.
And so it's easy to say, if I've never had this or I've only had it in a blend, it can go.
So what's really unique, and to take this back to final thoughts on Viognier, is that unlike Petit Verdot or a lot of the Bordeaux varietals or a lot of most grapes in France, frankly, outside of Pinot and Chardonnay, most grapes are looked at as blending. They change by vintage. Sometimes they're not included. And that is a thing that the French have perfected over the course of 1,000 years. Whereas in America, we just go, screw it, we're going to do a single bottle. And Petit Verdot, the French would I'm sure it's somewhere in France they bottle a single Petit Verdot, but there's not an appellation.
Right.
And it's not a thing that is done. Maybe they do it in the Languedoc somewhere or something. But when you look at Condrieu, that is a grape that literally has a place where they make it by itself. And that is incredibly rare in France, rarer than I think people realize.
Yeah.
There's always Chinon. There's always places where they do Sauv Blanc on its own. But for the most part, Loire notwithstanding, there aren't a lot of places where they do single bottlings of stuff.
That's
and
fair.
Even in the Rhone, it's hard to find that.
That's fair.
So I think that there's something special, unique
I agree.
in that.
You don't get an argument for me on that. But you can't defend that grape on these points, right? There aren't a lot of great examples out there that are easily accessible across the United States. It is not a food-friendly wine. And if you had a bad example of it, it's really, really bad.
Yeah, I think most people in the normal world would that may not have had Viognier, but would understand Riesling in this category. They think they've had Riesling, they've had terrible crap.
Yes.
When Riesling can be this incredible counterpoint to Pinot Grigio, where the acid is so much character and has so much to it. And
it's so much better. And it's so varied, right? Riesling can go from super sweet at 8% alcohol to bone dry at 12 or 13. There's range there. So it's very difficult to give people a range for Viognier because we are inclined to start always with very good expressions of it, right? You don't have to go German. Some of the best expressions of German Riesling aren't very expensive. You can get great Riesling from the Finger Lakes. It's not expensive. But to get the best example of Viognier, you have to spend some money.
All right, I want all of you listening to this. Shakera's at Black Girls Dine 2, TOO, on Instagram and on Twitter. And I'm telling you, I want you to fill her DMs and her comments with how much you disagree with her, because you're my last hope, guys.
You would all be wrong, but I welcome the love. And I even welcome you to share examples of Viognier that you want me to try. I'm going to do a whole weekly wines on just Viognier to make everybody happy.
I love this, and I can't wait to start production on the next season. Yep. Shakera, you are absolutely, bar none, hands down, one of my favorite people to work with and play with, and it's a pleasure to have you back on the pod.
It's a joy to be here.
Man, do we have a lot to do. I can't wait to be in New York City soon.
Come on, baby.
All right, my girl. We will talk very soon, okay?
All right, sounds good.
Thanks, everybody, for listening. I'm sure it's just my mom still listening right now at the moment, so I just want to have a word with you. Mom, I appreciate your time, and I wanted to let you know that on SOMM TV, we have several feature films coming this year. I know, Mom, that you were concerned about The Judgment of Paris. Well, that's coming in May. That is a film that will tell the actual true story of that event. And then we also have, the fourth SOMM film, Cup of Salvation, coming in September. If anybody wants to not sleep for 2 years and make that film with me. Anyways, I hope all you guys have a wonderful weekend and be safe, and join us on SOMMTV.com. Talk soon. Bye-bye.